Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Vision Critical webcast, the 4 moments of truth that lead to meaningful customer experiences. I'm Nick Stein, Senior Vice President of Marketing here at Vision Critical. And for those of you who aren't familiar with what we do, Vision Critical's cloud-based customer intelligence platform helps more than 650 high-performing companies around the world, including Nordstrom, Yahoo, NASCAR, and Molson Coors, build engaged, secure communities of customers they can use continuously for ongoing real-time feedback and insight. I'm really excited to be joined today by Brian Solis, a renowned digital analyst, sociologist, and futurist, whose influential work at Altimeter Group focuses on the effects of disruptive technology on business and society. Over the last few years, we've all seen firsthand how the widespread adoption of the internet, social media, and mobile devices has triggered a revolutionary shift in the balance of power between companies and their customers. Our customers today are empowered, and as a result, they have dramatically different expectations of the companies whose products and services they buy. And that means the question facing all of us today is, what can we do about it? In Brian's latest book, What's the Future of Business, he writes very persuasively about how companies need to rethink the ways they interact and engage with today's empowered customers. Brian, welcome to the webcast. It's great to have you here.
Hey, Nick, it's really awesome to be here, and thank you for that. That's a wonderful introduction.
Absolutely. Before I turn things over to you, Brian, I just want to briefly go over how all of you can join today's conversation. You can post your questions to Twitter, and you can mention me at Stein_Nick or Brian at Brian Solis, or you can also use the hashtag Customer Revolution. So let's quickly take a look at today's agenda. We are going to speak about the future of business. Brian is going to talk about his book and the work that he's been doing and really looking at the way businesses need to change the way they create customer experiences. He's also going to take you through the 4 moments of truth that he's distilled as a result of his work. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about how you can really develop meaningful intelligence on your customers. And then finally, we're going to open things up to a Q&A. So feel free, you can actually go in and enter questions right under the question tab, and we will get to as many of them as we can in the Q&A. And for any that we don't get to, we'll actually be posting a follow-up blog post on the Vision Critical blog where Brian and I will answer any questions we're not able to answer as time permits today. So Brian, without further ado, I'm going to turn things over to you.
Thanks, Nick. I appreciate it, and thanks everyone for taking time out of your busy day to join us. I know that we've all got a million things to do, and it's really easy to get caught up in all of that. What I want to share with you is a little bit of what inspired me to write WTF, or What's the Future of Business. And it's one of those moments in life when you realize that, even you have to disrupt yourself. You can't just keep talking about change. You actually have to start to change yourself in order to not just stay relevant, but to also demonstrate just how much things are changing around us. And by that I mean, this was I think my 6th book, and certainly it's easy to get into a comfort zone after writing so many books. But here I am telling you that your markets are changing, behavior's changing, and as a result, business, education, governments need to change. And I kind of sat back and thought, it's a little ridiculous if all I'm going to do is write, beautiful language, beautiful narrative, great research, of course, but just throw it into a same old rectangle with the same old paper, same old font, and expect you to really kind of get the story. And if I'm talking about how businesses can create more meaningful experiences, I thought I'd better start with me. And the long story short is that before I published this last book, I was able to work with my publisher, Wiley, and we spent a good year, a fair amount of time studying UX of how people engage with iPads and smartphones, and also challenged ourselves if we had to invent or reinvent a textbook for high school students, how would we make print matter in a digital world? And that really was the impetus behind the layout and the design of the book, so that way the book itself could become an experience and then use the rest of the book to kind of tell you how to do it and the importance of it. And so I learned a lot through that process, right? And I gained empathy in a way that just allowed me to realize that the key to what's happening right now isn't to just say, hey, look, what's the latest platform I need to be on? What's the latest digital strategy we need for our organization? How can we be more like this company that seems to master real-time marketing every time there's an event? It doesn't start that way. The questions actually start with, why do we do things the way we've always done it? How can we do things better? It's a time where you can just look at anything that you do or everything that you do and just start to question everything. Because that's what I did with the book, right? It's pretty easy to just follow a path. It's pretty easy to just sit in your comfort zone, but at the same time, this is about disruption, right? And it's really dire when you think about it in a good way. You're either going to be disrupted or you're going to disrupt yourself. And I think that this is that time, that fantastic moment in our careers where we get to change not only how our job is done, but ultimately what it means for the companies that we work for, the companies that we represent, and ultimately for the people who matter, right? Your coworkers, your customers. And that's why I borrowed Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey in this book. So what you're going to see a lot through this presentation is artwork that's just straight from the book. And I wanted us to sort of understand that, yes, we're going to go through challenges trying to change things, but at the same time, the people you're trying to reach, your customers, your prospects, whomever your stakeholders are, they also go through a hero's journey. They're in many ways a lot more digital than we are. In some ways, we are the very people we're trying to reach. And when you consider sort of this chaos of Web 1.0, with websites that haven't been really optimized since the 90s, you have new websites that look like they were designed in the 90s, you have social, you have this mobile responsive and adaptive design movement that's happening to make websites show up on the little screen. You have things like YouTube and communities that are much more important than ever before. The whole thing about this is that your customer has to navigate through this mess to find information, to find products, to find solutions and services, and to make decisions outside of all your creative stuff, outside of your Facebook page, your Pinterest page, your website. They've got to go and try to find the things that are really important to them. And the question is, what are they finding? And how much of it is stuff you've created versus what the community has created versus just stuff that doesn't even come up in their discovery process? And for us, this is something to really use as inspiration, is if you had to start over, what would it look like? If you had to build a website from scratch, what would its purpose be in today's world? Because I assure you that it is not in any way, shape, or form the digital brochure that it was in the 1990s. Nobody wants to sit and read all of the language that you had to write or you had to design around simply because it was what was approved. It's not what people are looking for. It's not what you're looking for. And that is sort of the dichotomy of what we have. We've got content marketing more important than ever before. You have social more important than ever before, but we're still kind of using it as broadcast mechanisms. We're still building around editorial calendars and broadcast calendars, and we're still sort of pushing our story, our message onto people, and then measuring engagement. How many people retweeted it? How many people liked it? How many people shared it? And really, that's just a vicious cycle. That doesn't matter. None of that matters. And it really starts with how we see the market. This is something that a friend of mine created out in Germany. He runs a company called Big. His name is Peter Gensch. And he sort of talked about this idea that when you use demographics or you use persona and you try to see people for who they are without really knowing people, your campaigns, your strategies, your creative really starts to reflect how you see the market or how you don't see the market, right? And here, the funny thing, I'll never forget this, he just kind of sat and presented this out there. He said, look, here's two people born in 1948. They're married for the second time. They both have two children. They're both wealthy. They both like dogs. And then when you see who it is, it kind of makes you just remember that, this mass marketing movement that we have going on, this mass personalization, this automation, all this talk about big data, we're missing the point. Social, mobile, all this stuff, all this data allows you to see people. And the question is, how do you build an infrastructure or strategy or a roadmap around people? So this is one of the first original pieces of art that was created for the book. I partnered with my really good friend Hugh McLeod, who's also known as at Gaping Void, to humanize each chapter in the form of one tune. And I think of all the people I know, only Hugh could do this. The point is that when you start to question everything, when you start to see people differently, when you start to see the processes and the technologies you use for reaching people, your natural response is to feel overwhelmed. And when you feel overwhelmed, a few things could happen. You break down. You just go right back into your comfort zone because it's easier. You make excuses because it's easier, like culture or executives who don't get it. But really, that's the point. That's where you sit there and say, look, if I ignore all of this, I can just sit here, as this image denotes, and just keep going about things as normal. Or I can do something about it. And that's where we start to separate just the average or the mediocre from the brilliance, the innovative. That's the choice we make. Because if it was hard, if it wasn't hard, I guess, then anyone could do it. But that's why I think it's interesting. If you're not pushing forward, right, somebody's pushing back. One of those sides is going to win over time. And that's why this is so important for us, you and me, as not just brilliant marketers or strategists, but also as people willing to stick their neck out and take a risk. And take a risk for the greater good of not just our own careers, but just innovation and relationships and engagement. Because, some of you are millennials. Some of you are the digital natives that you're trying to reach through all this technology. Some of you have, like me, been around for every revolution that's out there. We've had to learn it. We've had to embrace it every single time. We were analog first. The difference is that to the digital native, things are intuitive. They don't think about it in the way that we have to think about it. And at the same time, we think about it. But we're the ones putting strategy and dollars and resources behind things from an analog first perspective. So what happens when we stop thinking about the why and start thinking about the how and how to make it more important and how to make it more meaningful, and stop with the whole psychological dance of trying to discount it naturally because we don't want to have to learn something new? The whole point is that all this data, all this technology, all this insight that we have into people is supposed to not just necessarily be about big data. It's supposed to be about small data. And by small data, I mean when you look at the groups of people you're trying to reach, what's important to them? How do they behave? What do they like? What are their interest graphs? How do they behave? You start to see this relationship form between data science and digital anthropology. That's why a lot of people talk about these days about mapping the digital customer experience. But the thing that blows my mind, and I have done so much research around this, is a lot of companies will go out and map the digital customer experience without ever talking to customers. They just assume that, well, they're going to use a mobile phone, they're going to want to click through here, this is what the path is going to look like. And it's all a little bit ridiculous in the end. And that's what this is about. It's about gaining empathy. It's about showing that in order to build relationships, in order to create content that sings or speaks to someone, in order to get someone to take a click or a journey or a next step into a way that works for you and for them, you have to understand what they're trying to do, what they can't do, what they can do around you. All of those things just give you empathy. It's one of the reasons why I love that show, Undercover Boss. It's because at the end of every show, even though it's the same ending every time, somebody feels something differently. Somebody sees something differently, and it's because they'll say the same thing. I forgot what it was like, right? Because these are executives who are reporting to stakeholders, shareholders. They don't see the world the way you see it, and you need to see the world the way that your customers see it or your stakeholders see it. That's when things change. That's when your content strategy looks and feels different. That's when your overall digital strategy looks and feels different. That's when stuff starts to become connected. That's when stuff like, hey, why is it that we don't have a holistic view of our customer across every moment of truth in our organization? Why is it that customer service doesn't talk to marketing doesn't talk to sales, no one talks to product development, no one talks to UX? It's the thing of the past. Those business models are broken. Those business models are old. What we have to realize is that all of these windows, all of these screens, all of this technology, all this wearable stuff that's coming out, and it's not going to stop. So how does it work together? How can we make it work together? Not just having shiny object syndrome, but definitely seeing things for possibilities. That's what these screens are. They're windows into possible worlds, and we are its architects. We should be able to see something like this and not just laugh or not just say, hey, that was me last Friday night. It's to recognize that to them, that really is the best party ever. And they're probably telling each other that in the moment. But who am I to judge? You know, who am I to tell them, hey, look up, right? Like that popular video that's going around YouTube right now. Who am I to tell them that, right? This is their life. They'll live it the way they want to. All I can do is understand how to engage attention and how to make something matter in that moment. And this is when I realized during my research that, you know, a lot of companies were hiring for millennial marketers. There's a lot of millennial specialists, brand millennial marketers out there. There's a lot of millennial experts who help companies hire other millennials. I started to realize, though, that it wasn't just about millennials. Obviously, it's a big deal, right? In just a handful of years, millennials are going to represent 70% of the workforce. Imagine what that means to the market. So what happens when someone who's 50 or 60, for that matter, uses a tablet or a smartphone or Facebook or Pinterest? I can assure you that after a little while of becoming immersed in new technology, they start to exhibit millennial-like behaviors in decision-making and actions and expectations. And that's huge. I realized that the way to bring about change was to go right against the thing that prevented change, and that was a sense of urgency being absent. So if you could create a sense of urgency, if you could show people to what extent things were changing and how that was going to impact the bottom line over time, that was going to help all of us. So I started to realize that it wasn't just about millennials, it was about this greater group of connected customers and employees that we really started to look at. And that's when I came up with this concept of Generation C, this connected generation, this idea that people who live a digital lifestyle are not like the traditional customers and employees we know. Everything becomes different. So if you can appreciate them for their differences, you could actually grow your market right now, because things are going to be split for the next 10 or so years. So this idea of questioning multitasking, of not getting it, by being skeptical or just dismissing it and all, because it's not something that you do, or it's not something that your bosses do or your executives do, it's absurd to brush it off. It is a reality. Not only is it a reality, it's something you have to design for, and it's something that you now have to stay in front of, because if you don't stay in front of it, you're going to react to it. 6 minutes, when I saw that stat originally when I was doing research, I thought, wow, that's ridiculous. Only 6 minutes? And now think about it. 6 minutes is a long time. Imagine what you could do with 6 minutes. Imagine what you could do when you start to understand who they are as people, people trying to do something, people searching for outcomes. What if you could become the architect of that engagement? Because that's what this is about. Experiences aren't just things that happen. Well, they are. But what if they didn't just happen as surprises or as a matter of chance? What if you design them? Because you have to think about it this way. Something happens to all of Generation C. That is, when you become more connected, just by the nature of connectedness, you become more informed. And as you become more informed, you become more empowered. And as you become more empowered, you become more demanding. You want things now. You want things personalized. You want things to work on the screen. You want things when you want it. It's second nature now. You probably don't even know that you have become impatient. You don't even know that you have become more demanding. It's just a thing, right? Just like this, it's funny. I've been putting my phone down quite a bit to just sort of observe people in their natural habitat. And there was this funny article that came out in Business Insider the other day that somebody ran an experiment where they took a sidewalk, and it was a pretty wide sidewalk, and they wrote on one side, people with phones walk on the right side. People walking take the left side, kind of like the airports, just if you want to stand on the conveyor belt, then you sit on the right. If you want to pass, you go on the left. And it was fascinating because people who were watching those on cell phones didn't even notice that there was a side for them to take. And that's the thing, is nobody thinks that they're not paying attention when they're on their phones. No one thinks that they're a horrible driver when they're driving and taking selfies. It's unfortunately becoming part of life. And so we have to think about then, what is their journey? And what does that journey mean for us, and how would we design it differently? Because once I have your attention, let's just say I happen to be fortunate enough to get your attention, whether it's on the small screen, whether it's on a large screen, whether it's in a social network, in an app, or whatever. What am I going to do with that attention? And that's where experience architecture, this concept of designing for experiences, designing the journey, where this all comes out. So when you study the digital customer journey, you design for what happens next across a variety of screens, across a variety of contexts. And it's much more sophisticated than saying, okay, we're going to throw people into the top of the funnel. The top of the funnel is going to be this landing page. That is old school. I'm not saying that it needs to die. I'm just saying that it is not how the new world works. No one thinks the same way that other people think. Everything is individualized. But if you had to bucket it into two different ways, one would be traditional, one would be incredibly optimized for the impatient digital world that we all live in. So what could a new funnel look like that isn't something to cater to everyone? Because that doesn't work anymore. And the point is that when you don't architect this, when you don't think about it, when you don't empathize with the journey, you just start to take all these channels, which you might be responsible for some here, other people on your team are responsible for others, and what you end up having is just this chaotic experience. No one's talking to each other. No one's holding to a standard. Nobody's considering what happens next, where someone goes, and is it a natural series of steps and processes to what you originally designed or what you hoped or what someone expects. And this is why in a lot of my research today, I study digital transformation. It's an enterprise ecosystem-wide thing, but I've been focusing specifically on digital transformation within marketing and service around the journey. And some of the best, most progressive companies out there are actually taking all these disparate channels, all these disparate groups, and folding them into one group that can run and manage an experience in ways that are consistent. Because it looks nice on paper. It looks nice by showing, hey, look at this interweaving of digital and physical touch points. Doesn't it look beautiful? Look at how it all works together. Look at how it lies nicely over the funnel or the journey. But then you go through it. Go through it on a smartphone. Try to finish your journey on a smartphone. That is not the second screen. That is the first screen. You can't finish it. Most of the time you can't. Google published a report a couple years back, and still really good. It was called the multi-screen world. If you Google it, you can actually find it and download it for free. But it shows you through a variety of scenarios. They studied customer engagement. And in each one of those scenarios, depending on the industry, that showed you how they had to hop from screen to screen to screen in order to complete a transaction, depending on where they were in the journey. And I remember when this report first came out, marketers said, yeah, well, we're going to have to optimize that screen relationship so that it's not creating so much friction, so that abandonment is much lower. And I remember thinking, yes, you do need to do that. But at the same time, you also need to consider how could someone finish that transaction without having a screen hop or without having to multi-screen. So the point of that is what happens when you lay out the journey. What happens when you consider what that journey is and how that influence, that affects every moment of truth, not just from the stuff you put out there, but what you see right here in the center, which is the influence loop. And this is, in the book, I introduce a moment called the ultimate moment of truth, something that we'll talk about over the next few minutes. This is your template. This is where you start to see what the journey looks like, and I apologize for so many screen forwards, but there's just no animation here. So we're faking it. But as you see, depending on your customer, depending on their influence channels, depending on their touch points, a lot of times it's not just the touch points that you design, they're finding their own that work for them. And so our job as experienced architects is to look at how do we bring all of these moments together through the touch points we own and the touch points we don't own. And in the last moments that we have together before we go to Q&A, I just want to walk you through what these moments of truth are, because you can't think about it as a funnel anymore. You have to think about it as designing around what happens next. People are going to go to touch points that work for them, whether you own them or not, whether you come up or not. And it's only going to become much more dramatic over time. So what you're looking at here are the 4 moments of truth. This is actually something that this was Google's interpretation of it after WTF came up. And quite honestly, it's a little bit more attractive than the visual that I originally introduced. You can't design, stimulus is it. Awareness is just that, right? I mean, that, however you get it is how you get it. Don't stop trying to get it. Well, Google got really famous for the 0 moment of truth when I think it was Jim Lazinski who wrote the 0 moment of truth, which you can get at zeromomentoftruth.com. This idea that when you are ready to make a decision or when you're ready to begin your journey, you're going to start maybe with Google, right? And so you start designing around these moments of truth. So this is why SEO and SEM became a big thing. This is why PageRank, all of these things became so important because you needed to show up in the 0 moment of truth, wherever the 0 moment of truth takes place. So we know that when someone searches, something comes back. You have teams dedicated to making sure that something comes back in Google. But what happens when the ZMOT doesn't just start in Google? What happens when the ZMOT takes place in an app? What happens when the 0 moment of truth takes place in a conversation or a community or in a search box in a social network? All of this is about you understanding where those moments of truth happen, but more so where those touch points are occurring, what comes back, and how would you design differently? Just to give you an idea, in certain industries, YouTube is a huge first step. People want to see videos, right? Because what comes back in Google? A lot of times it's websites. And if you click that website on a small screen, most of the time it just sucks. You're not able to just make a decision or find something fast. But what happens in YouTube? You get videos back. They're usually created by somebody like you who had the same question and decided to answer it with a video. That is tremendous. In many just cases that I've gone through with brands, not just B2C, by the way, but B2B, in some of the most obscure vertical industries, most of the time, branded content doesn't come back because it's, number one, doesn't exist, or two, it's not optimized to show up. But it's still happening. So what do you do about that? That's yours to define. So you have to figure out, in those moments, you are shifting from owned content or paid content to come back, or destinations or landing pages or what have you, to shared experiences coming back. And those shared experiences are yours to invest in, to define, and to ensure that those are coming back in all of the places where the zero moment of truth happens. You know that a lot of companies invest in keywords. You should do that. Please don't stop. But at the same time, did you know that a lot of connected customers don't just bother with keywords? They actually ask questions, or they put questions in, or phrase sentences in ways that are just a little bit more natural language-like. And there are usually 6, 8, sometimes 10 variations of that. But just even knowing what that is, it's a process called keyword anthropology. Just even knowing what that is, you actually start to get a sense of what people are looking for, right? It's not just keywords, it's a conveyance of context. You can start to design content. You have places to place that content now that start to address those questions or those scenarios. So huge. The ultimate moment of truth is a moment that I introduce in WTF, and it's that moment when somebody searches for something, or somebody is in the consideration phase, or somebody is about to purchase, and a shared experience comes back in their network of relevance, whether it's an app, community, network, whatever it is. The ultimate moment of truth is the next person's zero moment of truth, and the ultimate moment of truth is something that we need to design for. We need to start to think about the experiences people want to have and the experiences that people are having, and how do we close those gaps? How do we bring the UMOT and the ZMOT together? Because if you don't, it happens for you. This was an important lesson that I've written about quite a bit, because businesses just still don't seem to get it. It's still about getting people to make a purchase. It's still about marketing in the early part of the stages, not about marketing after somebody becomes your customer, not rewarding them with better experiences, not keeping them engaged. Marketing is not just about leading the purchase. Marketing is about the relationship now. Because if you don't market toward the relationship, if you don't build shared experiences, if you don't continually invest in a better experience after purchase, people are still going to express experiences, and those are going to culminate. They just don't disappear on the internet. Those things stick around for a while, and they start to populate every network and every app, and over time, it just becomes your brand. This was something that I did as a funny example for an airline that I was working with, to show them that in any moment, this is what your word cloud is. And this wasn't scientific at all. This was just me going to a series of social outlets and just feeding that into a word cloud generator where all of the most often used words were bigger, depending on usage. And as a joke, I compared this to their website. And by the way, their website was the complete opposite. It was customer focus, relationship, innovation, and on time, I think, was one of them. And you compare the two, you're like, what world do you live in? Because you can't market your experiences and expect people to just, absorb them. You have to actually build experiences you want people to have and the experiences you want people to share. And that is about creating and collaborating with your markets, investing in shared experiences, investing in experiences, investing in every moment of truth, so what they experience is what they share. And this is something that you need to think about because your job is much more important. It's much bigger than it's ever been before. And don't wait for someone to tell you that. Well, you could wait. I mean, maybe I just told you that and you're kind of thinking, well, that's new. What do you mean? But what I mean is don't wait for somebody in your organization to empower you to do more. You have to take it. Because most people don't have the vision to see what they don't know. Most people don't have the courage to go do what it is that they don't know to do, right? This is why we're spending time together. I work with businesses all the time. And as an analyst, it's my job to document what they're doing and how they're doing it. And then I'm supposed to feed that back out to you as best practices, right? But the problem that I have sometimes is that I can't tell you honestly that's what you need to do because they haven't sat here to think about how do we make experiences better? How do we change things from inside the organization so that we could be more effective and more engaging, more meaningful, and then allow me as an analyst to go report that back out. That's why I've changed my beat over the last couple of years to digital transformation because I need to get deeper in the organization, even if there are fewer organizations to study, to bring you back out what people are doing differently, how they're leading, how they are uniting all these different fronts into one common role. And what you see here is exactly that. It's the beginning of integration, where brand experience, user experience, which isn't just about website design or product design, user experience now becomes part of experience design, and customer experience, right, CX. All of this just equates to one group or one movement within the organization to unite the journey, where you're not just thinking about, well, hey, what's the return on investment? You're thinking about, well, if I had to measure success and I had to look beyond something like, I don't know, NPS, would you recommend this? How about looking at, did someone recommend this? Because that is the power of listening. That's the power of all of these social platforms, that you can start to see what people are sharing and what they're not sharing. You can see the experiences that people have that you're not hearing about. And like that airline example, you can really start to see what you need to solve for. That's how you create a sense of urgency. That word cloud should not be a surprise to you. That word cloud should actually be something that you've shaped and that you're mindful of and that you continue to shape over time. That's return on experience. This NPS stuff is a nice to have, but imagine if you were just measuring experiences. Did you have the experience we wanted you to have? Did you go out there and feed it, or did you detract from it? That's real. That's honest. And getting there means that you know what customers value. And it's because you did the work. What you're looking at here is actually a few years old now. This is research that Razorfish did on behalf of Virgin America when the airline was about to launch. It kind of went through and said, hey, how do you build a successful airline at a time where people actually just hate airlines? People hate the flying experience. How would you deliver value? What is the value that people want? And so they did research. It's actually something that's been available to us for years. It's just that over the years with technology, just look at call centers as an example. You know, it's just we've used technology to get away from customers, to use all this technology to blast people, to automate marketing, to not necessarily think about what it is that makes people who they are and what could make us much more valuable or what could create a much more meaningful experience. These are 6 pillars that Virgin America built its entire brand on, not just in how it designed the brand or how it marketed the brand, but also how it designed the airplanes, the technology in the airplanes, why there's a red carpet that leads up to beautiful ticket counters, why there's a disco ball over a lot of these ticket counters, the reason why pilots and flight attendants go to offsites like we do at our companies to build better relationships so that when you get on a plane, it actually feels like they like each other, not like they just have to be there. The reason why they don't slam overhead bins, you'll never hear that on Virgin America unless it's somebody is sitting next to you that just doesn't know how to do it. They're taught to just close it because it's all about an experience. The same why there's a certain light hue on the plane or the kind of music. That's all design. That's all an experience. It's not just about how do you create a funny Vine video or Instagram campaign. It's about how do you take your job and make experiences that become meaningful and shareable. When you study what customers want or what they don't want, you get some really interesting things, and it varies by market, but a lot of it seems to look like this, and this is just stuff I've done over and over and over again. When you design around what you know, when you design around empathy, when you design around moments of truth, I promise you, everything you do next is different. Not going to look like what you're doing today, and if it does, then that's great. It's because you really started to care and it started to show. But I promise you, everything that you do moving forward is going to look a little different. Experiences are something that is incredibly emotional. It's not just because you sold something or because you had a transaction. It is because you made somebody feel something, do something, think something, and that's experience architecture. That's what you're designing for. I know, Nick, I'm going to get back to you here in just a minute because I want to make sure we get the questions, but I'm just going to wrap up here with a couple of slides. Engagement is not something you do. Engagement is not something you measure. Engagement is something that you are. It is a higher calling. It is a higher purpose. It feels different. It looks different. It acts different. Leaving here today, I want you to just think about if you had to design something from scratch for a digital economy, what would it look like? Because it's different than you taking your legacy thinking, your legacy products, your legacy campaign mentality, and your legacy budgets. It's not trying to adapt all that stuff to now. It's trying to say, how could I do now differently and make it matter more? Because you're going to find it works better. And this is a funny image that's called How Computers Are Born. And it's not one that I can actually share freely because some people get offended by it, obviously. But it's a perfect visual to say that things, when you start differently, you're going to get something different. And when you approach this, when you question everything, when you say just because it's been done this way, doesn't mean it has to be done this way moving forward, that's when you know that you're on the right path. That's when you know that you can actually create something that's not only born digital, but it's something experiential. And you can design those experiences for the 4 moments of truth. It becomes much more important than anything you've ever done before. And it's inspiring because that means you get to work with people across your organization to build and design around these experiences in every moment of truth so that your work is more important than ever before, and more so that you become the case studies that people follow. You become the case studies that people want to build around because you pushed everything so far forward that mediocrity is so far from what you're doing that you're now leading an entirely new, series of strategies that are your competitive advantage. It is your competitive advantage. So with that, Nick, I'm going to go ahead and just kind of turn it over to you. But as right before I give you the official handoff, everybody, look, I've been doing this a long time. The more tactical you are, the more tactical you are. The more you're inspired, the more people are inspired. Emotions, empathy, trust, all those things are contagious. Innovation begins from within because you felt it and because you wanted to design around it. So with that, Nick, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Brian. I'm feeling really inspired right now. And we're going to be giving away some copies of Brian's book to some lucky attendees today. So look out for that. And please go out and read this book as well as his other books, because as you could see from today's presentation, he's just someone who thinks very deeply about what we need to do as organizations to be more successful in the challenging environment we're in today. And that's kind of where I want to pick up, which is where do we go from here? Brian has very, very much inspired us about what we need to do. But the question is, how do we do it? How do we stop being reactive to the way that companies out there experience us, experience our brands? And how do we proactively get a better understanding of what our customers truly want? How do we get intelligent about our customers? And that's what I want to spend a couple of minutes talking with you about today. And I'm going to start off by going back to, I think, a very compelling image that Brian had as part of his presentation, which is showing this divide between what we promise and what we deliver. And I think what's amazing today, if we think about it, is that companies have more data on their customers than they ever had before. I mean, we can view a comprehensive purchase history from pulling it from our CRM database. We can access the latest complaints that were made from a call center. We can surface their latest Twitter or Facebook posts. But the challenge is that all this data in so many ways hasn't really made us smarter about what our customers really want. And in other words, what it hasn't done is give us intelligence about our customers that we can actually act on as companies. I think in many ways it's actually created more chaos and complication in trying to understand what really drives our customers to behave the way they do. And I think what companies are still searching for today is that complete customer understanding, which goes beyond just, what our customers buy and what they're saying and what they're doing, but to actually get into why. Why are they buying what they buy? Not just what are they saying about us, but what do they think and feel? And so, interesting, take a step back for a minute, and I want to talk about a really interesting study that came out this year from IBM that kind of validates what we've been talking about today. And what they did was IBM went out and actually interviewed more than 4,000 senior executives globally. And they asked them what was really important to them when they think about their business strategy. And it turns out that next to the C-suite themselves, customers exerted more influence on the business strategy of these business leaders around the world than anything else, more than the board of directors, more even than the corporate strategy department. And so I think as we think about that and we think about what Brian's been talking about, we need to figure out how can we equip ourselves to actually take that feedback, that engagement that we can have with our customers and actually do something meaningful with it. And that is kind of what we've been focused on doing here at Vision Critical. So just very briefly, for those of you who don't know us, Vision Critical's is a cloud-based customer intelligence platform. And what we're really focused on is allowing our customers to get the right feedback and engagement from their customers at the right time in the right way. And to do it in a way that is actionable so that they can actually build better products, provide better services, and deliver better business outcomes. The kind of outcomes that Brian has been talking about, where you reduce that divide that exists between your customer and your brand. And what we found is that this stuff actually works. So when you actually truly engage your customers, research out there, whether it's from recent study from the Aberdeen Group, recent Gallup study on customer engagement, you actually see real business results, increased revenues, higher retention, and increased profits. So with that, I would like to take the few minutes that we have remaining and go to Q&A. And I wanted to start off, we've had a lot of great questions coming in here. Brian, I want to start off asking you, this is the question. You mentioned that as marketers, we have to observe behavior and who we are to tell people how to act. But you also mentioned the concept of being an architect of that experience. What's the balance, and how do we engage in this conversation with our customers without overstepping our rights as marketers in the minds of consumers?
Oh, wow. Great question. There's a couple parts to this answer. One is if you go to briansolis.com, the latest post up there is a link to my brand new research report that you could download for free. What we had learned, so interesting. What we had learned is that everybody talks about sort of this concept of change, investing in digital and going through what's called digital transformation. And we did this survey with digital strategists and executives, and 88% of those that we surveyed said that they were undergoing digital transformation, right? But in that survey, we had said, that the way we were defining digital transformation was about investing in understanding how digital customers were going through their journey to use technology investments to sort of improve those moments of truth, right? But even with that definition, we found that only 25% of those panelists had actually studied the customer journey, meaning that they went through a day in the life of, tried to understand the context, the touch points, the screens, and that the rest of them had talked about doing it but hadn't done it, or just hadn't done it, period. But yet they were all investing in new technologies, new channels, new platforms, new networks, new apps, just because, right? And so that's a problem. To me, just using a hunch or gut instinct without necessarily getting empathy throughout the process is probably worse for your relationships than you actually studying data or trying to make things more personal. I think people have always said that they would rather give you data if they feel it's going to improve their experience with you or the product or their relationship, because it makes them feel like they matter. It's almost counterintuitive when it shouldn't be counterintuitive. So we have a long way to go, but it first starts with sort of appreciating that you have something to learn.
Thanks, Brian. I completely agree that what it comes down to in the end is creating an environment in which your customers feel comfortable sharing with you the feedback that they have. And from our perspective, actually, we have found that with some of our customers, because they're able to create a real sense of community, they get a level of engagement and a level of feedback from their customers because they feel really comfortable sharing and knowing that what they're sharing is not going to be abused. A perfect example of that actually is NASCAR. We have an upcoming webinar with NASCAR, and they're going to talk about their community where they've actually got a waiting list of people who want to join, because the community is something that gives them, their fans, an opportunity to come in and share feedback about ways that they would like to see NASCAR change. And that's actually enabled them to make real changes to the way that they run their business.